Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world of cold stone castles, endless embroidery, and a royal lifestyle that looked glamorous from the outside, but was often anything but. You're born into nobility, but don't get excited, because your swaddling cloth might as well be a diplomatic treaty. Your cries are the soundtrack to palace servants whispering, "Who can we marry her off to?" And you won't be toddling around the nursery long before your name ends up on a list of eligible alliances. The fate of kingdoms might rest on your tiny, powdered shoulder sand you haven't even grown teeth yet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born in a time when girl and dynastic asset are nearly synonymous. Forget birthday parties or cuddles for your own sake. Your arrival triggers a flurry of court scribes drafting letters and messengers, galloping across muddy landscapes to alert potential allies. Your value isn't measured by your personality or cleverness, but by your bloodline and the size of the lands tied to it. If your mother had a hard labor, well, she's expected to get back on her feet soon. There are more heirs to produce after all. You grow up being told you're special, but not for the reasons you think. Your status isn't about your smile or your wit, it's about your womb, your obedience, and your potential to become the hinge on which peace or war turns. Historians still argue whether royal daughters were truly cherished by their fathers or simply tolerated until their political usefulness could be activated. You might receive elaborate gifts, but every token has strings attached. That gilded rocking cradle, a bribe to another noble house. That silk bonnet, a diplomatic signal. And the funny part, if your family was truly high-ranking, you wouldn't even be raised entirely by your parents. Nannies and governesses take charge, while your mother prepares you from afar for a life she herself probably despised. She teaches you to curtsy, smile when it's painful, and remain absolutely still when measured for your first tiny corset. Because yes, shaping your body to fit the court's tastes begins early, like molding dough for bread that someone else gets to eat. A mainstream historical fact? Take Eleanor of Aquitaine. Born to one of Europe's richest families, she was heiress to vast lands, but even she was married off at 15 to a French prince. Her childhood wasn't about freedom, it was about grooming her for diplomacy, marriage, and manipulation. She's remembered as powerful, but the power came at the price of agency. Meanwhile, a quirkier tidbit for some royal families actually held formal baby viewing ceremonies, almost like product unveilings. Nobles would gather to look at you, and start speculating about what royal house you'd someday unite with. You were barely out of your cradle before the political matchmaking began, and if you cried too much during this grand viewing, some might whisper that you were bad luck. Charming, right? Your earliest memories, if you even keep them, are filled with polished floors too slippery for your soft leather shoes, cold, drafty rooms, and tutors correcting your posture before you could even spell your own name. You weren't allowed to be loud. You weren't allowed to run. And that thing you did laughing too freely? That's frowned upon. Royal girls were trained to be graceful shadows, not actual children. Your gifted books you can't read yet, dolls that are really just tiny, practice people for how you'll later care for your own offspring, and mirrors because beauty, in this life, is a form of armor. Too bad you don't get a choice in how it's forged. Some girls were told they were too plain, and others too pretty. Either way, it made them a problem. Even your first language lessons weren't designed to entertain or enlighten you. You learn French so you can someday flirt with a foreign prince. You learn Latin so you can read religious texts and, more importantly, pretend you're pious enough to be marriage material. But maybe the worst part of all is that even in the nursery, your future already includes a wedding. You don't know the man, you don't even know the country, but you'll go. Everyone does. Refusing would be like a chess piece refusing to move. And you're not the only pawn on the board. Across the continent, dozens of other girls are growing up, just like you, pressured, polished, and packaged for export. A single treaty could change your entire life, erase your current plans, and send you galloping across the continent before you've even figured out how to braid your own hair. 1,000 years later, scholars will still debate whether your fate was sealed in the womb or scribbled in some smoky royal study when your father's wine cup was only half full. You wake each morning in a bed that feels far too large for someone so small. the canopy draped with velvet embroidered by hands you'll never meet. The windows let in greyish light, and the cold creeps across the stones before your feet even touch the floor. The fire in the hearth. It wasn't lit for your comfort. It was lit because a frostbitten heiress is harder to marry off. Your toys are lined up, waiting to teach you your place. A miniature loom to practice weaving. A wooden cradle with a porcelain doll inside, eyes wide open even in the dark, reminding you of your most sacred duty, motherhood. A painted tea set for play acting, the elegant submission of polite conversation, and a set of tiny silver cutlery, because even your table manners are part of your value. Nothing is just for fun, not for you. Even how you're dressed is training. Laces are pulled tight on your tiny corset, the stiffness pressing against your ribs before you've had a chance to finish growing them. The idea is to teach your body early that it belongs to the crown, not to you. Walking without clumsiness in embroidered slippers on icy floors, that's considered part of your charm. Your governess even counts how many times you stumble. Your tutor arrives with scrolls and sighs. You're taught to speak like a lady, think like a bishop, and behave like a statue. No raised voice, no wild questions. You're praised for obedience and punished for curiosity. Historians still argue whether this suppression of female intelligence was conscious policy or a product of the system's inertia. Either way, if you ask too many questions, your lessons mysteriously shorten. Meanwhile, your brothers are down the hall, learning fencing and hawking, reading military texts, and practicing how to command armies. You, on the other hand, are learning how to embroider lilies onto handkerchiefs that will one day be handed out to people thanking you for birthing their future king. Equality, not in this script. Sometimes, when the adults forget you're in the room, you overhear the real talk. Who you're to marry, how much land comes with you, which foreign noble house might be swayed by your grace and innocence. They speak of your body and future as though you're livestock, but with better jewellery. That sting never fades. A mainstream historical fact, Princess Margaret of Scotland, married to King Eric of Norway at just 13, left her home forever, with a dowry that included ships loaded with goods, but no promise she'd ever be allowed to return even for her mother's funeral. She was considered fortunate. You too might be lucky enough to be packed off to an icy castle hundreds of miles away, your childhood traded for political leverage. And then there's this odd little tidbit: some girls were trained with special musical instruments that were only played by women of noble birth. You weren't allowed to touch a lute or harp until someone confirmed your status. Royal girls had their own version of elite Spotify, and failing to master it could get you scolded in front of the whole court. Your movements are constantly watched. Whether you pick at your food or clean your plate, someone whispers about it. If you laugh too loud, it's called unladylike. If you cry, it's weakness. Even sneezing might earn a raised eyebrow. You begin to master stillness not out of peace, but as a form of self-preservation, holding your hands just right, tilting your head to the best angle for compliments, practicing smiles in the mirror so they don't show too many teeth. At public feasts, you're paraded like a prized falcon, colourful, regal, silent. Grown men try to flatter you even though you're still in training braids, and your role is to thank them sweetly and nod as though you're old enough to understand the implications. Your father beams proudly while mentally calculating which duke or count might be swayed by your rosy cheeks and royal lineage. And then there's the church. You spend a lot of time in chapels, genuflecting and reciting Latin prayers you don't fully understand. Religion isn't just about belief, it's your reputation's armor. Pious girls are easier to marry off. You keep your hands folded, your head bowed, and hope no one notices you're secretly questioning the logic of it all. But voicing doubt? That could lead to whispers of heresy, and you've seen what happens to heretics. The worst part? You start to internalize it. You begin to believe that your value is tied to silence, stillness, and submission. You watch your mother weep in private, but glide through court like an empress. You wonder if one day you'll be as skilled at hiding your heartbreak behind pearls and posture. Some nights, you sneak into the servant halls and catch glimpses of what real childhood looks like. Girls laughing without fear of being judged, running barefoot through the kitchens, the faces flushed from actual joy, instead of the painted blush you wear for court. For a moment, you wonder what your life might have been like if you were born outside the palace walls. But that moment doesn't last. Duty waits, and so does your betrothal contract. The ink on the parchment is older than your handwriting skills. By the time you're 6, or in some cases, Even younger, your name is already paired with a stranger's. Not in a poem or a nursery rhyme, but in a legal document sealed with wax, signed by men with rings as big as your fist. You're betrothed. Congratulations? You don't remember the first time someone told you who you'd marry. It might have been during your embroidery lesson, or whispered after prayers, slipped in casually like, "Pass the bread," followed by, "Oh, and your future husband is Duke such and such from the Alps. He's got good sheep and a decent army." You pretend to understand, but deep down you're trying to imagine what it's like to live among sheep. You're 7. You ask what he looks like. They say he's noble. You ask how old he is. They say it doesn't matter, he's a fine match. Translation: he's twice your age, and possibly smells like dried herbs and battlefield sweat. The marriage won't happen for a few years, of course, but that doesn't mean you're off the hook. You'll be trained to be his wife like you're in a school with one curriculum. How not to embarrass your future husband. Historians still argue whether young betrothals were seen as practical diplomacy or as sacrificial rites dressed in velvet. Either way, you don't get a say. Refusing the match isn't an option unless you fancy the convent life. Even the phrase love match would have gotten you laughed out of the solar. Romantic love was a luxury reserved for peasants and poets, not princesses. From now on, your entire education is tilted toward your target country. If he's French, you're drilled in courtly Parisian etiquette. If he's German, you learn to pronounce 15-letter words while holding a teacup. If he's from a backwater region but comes with a mountain fortress and a solid alliance, then your tutors pivot to teaching you how to smile without showing you're mildly panicking. You start writing letters to him, not because you want to, but because it's expected. You're told what to say. "My noble lord, I await our union with great joy," even though you're still sleeping with a stuffed unicorn and think union means sharing your dessert. Sometimes you draw a little heart in the corner, and your governess scolds you for being frivolous. Hearts are not part of the arrangement. He might not even send a reply. A mainstream historical fact: Isabella of Valois was married to King Richard II of England when she was just 6. They didn't consummate the marriage, of course, but she was still a child queen, paraded through London with a crown far heavier than her own thoughts. That's your fate too, more or less. Be seen. Be quiet. Be ready. Want a weirder tidbit? Some noble families would send painted portraits or, even more awkwardly, wax figures of the young bride-to-be to the groom's court, as if saying, "Here's your future wife. Please don't be surprised when she shows up in real life." And those figures? Let's just say the artists were optimistic with how they portrayed you. Flattering was the point. Accuracy was optional. You're reminded daily that you're lucky to be chosen. Some girls your age are passed over and sent to nunneries not out of piety, but because their dowries aren't shiny enough. You've got a good name, a strong lineage, and most importantly parents with land that other royals want. That makes you desirable. You're not a child, you're currency. As the wedding years creep closer, your anxiety builds like ivy on castle walls. You watch your older cousins marry off one by one, their eyes dulling a bit each time they reappear at court. You see the bruises they try to cover with face powder, the stifled yawns from sleepless nights with husbands who treat them like prizes they've already won and grown bored of. And yet, you smile and practice your bridal curtsy. Sometimes you imagine running away, not in a dramatic leap from the tower way, just sneaking down to the stables, trading your velvet for a peasant's cloak, and heading toward the woods. But you know you'd be caught before reaching the first river. And besides, what would you do out there? You've been trained for gowns, not goats. There are nights when you pray not for your husband to love you, but simply for him not to be cruel. That's the bar. And people wonder why royal portraits always look so somber. But of course, none of this is voiced aloud. You keep the performance going. You speak the lines you've memorized, bow at the right moments, and nod politely when old men make comments about your budding grace. Internally, you're counting down the days like they're prison sentences. And eventually, the betrothal becomes real. Not just parchment and promise, but carriages and guards, dowries weighed, and dresses fitted. You look at yourself in the mirror and see someone who resembles you but smaller inside. Somehow, your childhood is gone. You're a bride in training. And the next phase of the plan? Shipping you off to meet your fate. The castle is humming like a hive the morning you leave. Not with excitement, but with the strange mechanical energy of a political operation in motion. Servants are running everywhere, Chambermaids are folding and packing silk gowns you'll probably never wear again, and your governess keeps smoothing your hair, even though you've already had it braided 3 times. You're being shipped out not on a pleasure cruise, but as a diplomatic parcel with beating heart and silent dread. You ride out flanked by knights, clerics, ladies-in-waiting, and trunks so heavy they could anchor ships. You're not a runaway bride, you're a royal export. And though the embroidered canopy above your carriage offers shade, it doesn't protect you from the gnawing in your gut. You don't know this land you're going to. You've never seen this man you'll marry. The road stretches long and ominous, and the countryside seems to change shade the further you travel from home. Historians still argue whether royal brides felt honoured or terrified during these long processions. What they do agree on is this: once you leave, you don't come back. This isn't just a journey across kingdom sits, an erasure of your identity. Your name is still yours, but your surname and homeland become whispers in your new court. You are now the Duchess of that place, or the Queen of this kingdom. Who you were before doesn't matter. There's a strange ceremony waiting for you when you arrive. The ceremonial hand. Off. Your escort's the only people you've seen from home in Weeksbow. Kiss your hand, and leave. You're now in the care of strangers. Foreign customs, foreign food, foreign faces. Your new hosts examine you like they're checking merchandise for damage. You force a smile while your hands shake behind your skirts. Want a fun but odd little detail? In some regions, the groom wasn't allowed to meet you until you underwent a symbolic cleansing, a bath, scented oils, a new wardrobe stitched in local colours. Some believe this washed away your old loyalties. It's like a royal version of being dry cleaned. And if you were lucky, you were sent off with a dowry that made the journey easier. Gold coins, spices, bolts of silk, maybe even livestock. Some royal women were accompanied by entire entourages, cooks, musicians, pet falcons. Others were sent with little more than a chest of clothes and a few tearful blessings. The richer your family, the more extravagant your send-off. But oddly, extravagance didn't always equal safety. In fact, the wealthier your dowry, the more dangerous the road could be. Bandits, enemy scouts, opportunistic rival Saul had reason to intercept your caravan. You weren't just a bride, you were a treasure shipment on wheels. One mainstream fact comes from Catherine of Aragon, who sailed from Spain to marry Prince Arthur of England. Her fleet hit storms, and she nearly didn't survive the crossing. When she arrived, she was drenched, exhausted, and met with underwhelming pageantry. Her fancy Spanish silks? Ruined. Her servants? Seasick. And her first impression on her new court? Let's just say it wasn't the majestic arrival her mother promised. You reach the border, and before you cross, there's one final ritual. Everything you brought with you, your clothes, your jewelry, even your attendants might be stripped away, replaced with items from your new kingdom. This isn't a gift, it's a message. You belong here now. That gown your mother helped you choose? Gone. The locket she slipped into your palm at the last moment? Confiscated for security reasons. All replaced by stiff new garments that itch and smell of foreign dye. As you ride toward your new home, people along the roads cheer a stare. Some wave flags, some whisper, some just point and say, "There she is." You're both honoured and objectified, celebrated and dissected. You smile so much your cheeks ache. You wave until your shoulder goes numb, all while trying not to cry. At the gates of your new residence, be it a castle, palace, or suspiciously damp manor, you're presented to your betrothed. Maybe he's younger than expected. Maybe he's older. Maybe he tries to smile. Maybe he looks at you like one might look at a particularly promising warhorse. Either way, you're expected to curtsy and speak in the language you've been practicing for years. And no matter what you say, your worth is being weighed silently. Right now, this moment. There are scribes noting your posture, priests watching your modesty, ladies watching your figure, gossipers counting how many steps you take before tripping. Every movement is recorded not in ink, but in memory. Court memory is long and full of teeth. That night, you don't sleep well. You lie in an unfamiliar bed, in an unfamiliar room, in an unfamiliar country, listening to the strange creaks of the ceiling and the distant whistle of foreign wind. The fire in the hearth is too hot or not hot enough. The mattress smells like lavender and something else, something ancient. You clutch the sheets and try not to think of home, but every time you close your eyes, your mother's voice echoes. You wonder if she cried like this too. The wedding arrives before you can blink. The days leading up to it are a blur of fittings, ceremonies, and endless rehearsals of things you're not allowed to get wrong. There are tapestries being hung, banquet halls being polished, and bishops practicing blessings as if your union might collapse if one Latin syllable is mispronounced. You smile through it all. You nod and curtsy. But underneath the silk and incense, your stomach twists like a rope in a storm. The dress is magnificent, but it doesn't feel like yours. Heavy layers of brocade, velvet, and pearls stitched so tightly it's as if the fabric is trying to crush you into royalty. It takes 3 women to get it over your head, and 2 more to lace you in. The veil weighs nearly as much as your courage. You stare at yourself in the mirror, and barely recognize the girl behind the gauze. You don't look like a bride. You look like a statue about to be placed in a crypt. Historians still argue whether medieval royal wedding nights were always consummated immediately, or whether the ceremonial spectacle sometimes substituted for actual intimacy. But the fear was always present. Because whatever happens behind closed doors, the entire court assumes they have a right to know about it, and to gossip accordingly. And here's a charming little fringe detail. In certain medieval courts, there was a custom called the bedding ceremony, where guests would escort the bride and groom to the bedchamber, and literally watch as the couple was tucked in, often with crude jokes and prayers for fertility shouted at the foot of the bed. Sometimes, a bishop would bless the bed. Sometimes, a cupbearer would offer wine to stir the seed. Sometimes, nobles would even stay behind to witness the start of the act itself. You're 13. You want to vanish. Your husband might be kind, might be cruel, or might just treat you like the piece of land you were traded for. You're trained not to flinch, not to cry, not to speak unless spoken to. Your body no longer feels like it belongs to you, and your thoughts float somewhere far away, tucked behind a wall of rehearsed phrases and polite smiles. You endure. When morning comes, there are blood-stained sheets to be displayed, proof of consummation, proof of virginity, proof that the alliance is legitimate and irreversible. If the proof isn't there, things get political fast. Was the bride pure? Was the groom capable? Is an annulment on the table? You're barely awake and already under investigation. A mainstream example? Margaret Tudor, sister to Henry VIII, married King James IV of Scotland when she was just 13. Her wedding included grand parades, religious ceremonies, and 3 days of feasting, but behind the scenes, she was deeply homesick and completely unfamiliar with the customs of the Scottish court. She was expected to become queen and mother overnight, and as history shows, royal expectations rarely care about emotional reality. After the wedding, your role shifts again. Now you're no longer maiden to be wed, you are wife, and soon you must become mother. Courtiers smile wider now, but they also watch more closely. Your appetite is observed, your waistline is tracked. You are monitored like a royal orchard expected to bear fruit in season. You've become the kingdom's most delicately veiled fertility project. But there's no instruction manual. You rely on older women, some helpful, some cruel to guide you. They talk of morning sickness and remedies, of childbirth survival rates and the many, many saints you should start praying to. Because giving birth, it's a gamble, especially in an age when even queens died in childbed, bleeding out on silk sheets while monks chanted in the hallway. You memorize every prayer, every herbal brew, every whispered superstition. Here's a bizarre tidbit. One medieval childbirth custom involved placing holy relics, or even a sword beneath the bed, to ward off demons during labor. In some places, midwives would whisper psalms into your ear while applying ointments made from rose oil, ground pearls, and yes, really powdered coral. Anything to protect you, though sometimes it felt more like theatre than medicine. Your days begin to feel surreal. One minute you're overseeing the kitchen's wine inventory. The next, you're learning how to disguise your vomiting so the court doesn't suspect you're pregnant too early. Your letters home are cheerful lies. You assure your mother you're happy. You pretend you understand your husband. You invent compliments for people who barely hide their dislike for you. Loneliness has a scent now rosewater, mixed with cold iron and old wood. Some nights you walk through the gallery and stare at portraits of past Queen Stoic, beautiful, blank. You wonder how many of them felt as trapped as you do now. You wonder how many dared to scream into pillows when no one was watching. And through it all, you smile. You must smile, because every step you take is watched. Every bite you eat is noticed. and every twitch of your lip can be interpreted as dissatisfaction. You are no longer just a woman. You are a symbol, and symbols don't get days off. You've survived the wedding, endured the first cold nights beside a man who feels more like a political chess piece than a husband, and now you live under constant scrutiny because the true test of your value has begun. You are expected to produce an heir. No, not just a children heir, preferably male, preferably healthy, preferably born on a day that astrologers will claim signals the dawn of a golden age. No pressure. From the moment the first inkling of pregnancy is suspected missed cycles, nausea, maybe a hand resting absently on your belly during dinner, you are no longer a person. You're a vessel, a sacred box of dynastic hope. Suddenly everyone wants to feed you. No more wine, fewer spices, more boiled chicken and stewed pears. Midwives whisper about your colour, the angle of your hips, and whether your mood swings suggest a boy or girl. And let's be clear, the wrong answer will disappoint the entire kingdom. A mainstream fact: Queen Anne Boleyn, wife of Henry VIII, suffered enormous pressure after giving birth to a daughter Elizabeth. Though Elizabeth would go on to become one of England's greatest monarchs, Anne's inability to deliver a male heir sealed her fate. She was executed less than 3 years later, her head rolled for what many considered a failure of her womb. And you? You're not even a queen. You don't have that kind of leverage. You are one miscarriage away from being whispered about at court dinners, one stillbirth away from being replaced. The pregnancy itself is grueling. There are no ultrasounds, no painkillers, only prayers and poultices, charm bracelets blessed by monks, and the uncomfortable attentions of court physicians who still debate whether bloodletting during pregnancy helps or harms. Historians still argue whether noble women were given better maternal care or simply a more expensive form of medieval guesswork. Either way, you're at the mercy of superstition and luck. Your sleep becomes a battlefield. Your cravings turn your meals into royal kitchen crises, and your swelling body is either praised or pitied, depending on the shape of your stomach. Wide belly? That's a girl. High belly? Surely a boy. You nod politely while dreaming of cake and silence. And when labour comes, oh, it's not private. Not for you. You're not whisked away to a tranquil birthing suite. You're surrounded by a flurry of women, chanting prayers, boiling linens, and wringing their hands while your screams are muffled by thick stone walls. If it's a royal birth, observers might be present not to help you, but to verify the legitimacy of the baby. Because heaven forbid, a servant switches out a child in a moment of desperation. Better to have a few noble ladies staring between your knees, just to be sure. Here's a macabre little tidbit: some royal birthing chambers had trapdoors beneath the bed, just large enough to pass a swaddled newborn to an official on standby. The idea was to prevent any funny business during the chaos of childbirth, because clearly, the woman in agony is the real threat here. When the baby finally comes, time stops. The room holds its breath. If it's a boy, there's a cheer, bells ring, wine flows. If it's a girl, the smiles are tighter. A bishop might still give thanks, but with a tone that suggests he's saving his real enthusiasm for next time. You lie there, shaking, bleeding, barely conscious, while someone else holds your baby. You're praised for your strength quietly, briefly, and then attention shifts. If you're lucky, your husband visits. If you're truly lucky, he stays longer than it takes to say, well done. But the focus now is on the child. Your body, your pain, your risk, they're already forgotten. You're confined to your chambers for churching, a 40-day period of recovery and purification before you're allowed to rejoin society. Not because anyone really cares about your health, but because tradition says childbirth makes you spiritually unclean. Never mind that the people saying this are all men who couldn't endure half your ordeal without screaming for a monk. And if the child dies, stillbirth, illness, crib death, it happens more often than not. You must dress in black, perform your grief in public, and prepare your body to try again. No one gives you time to mourn. Your value has an expiration date, and time is always running out. A girl might be raised for future bargaining, just like you were. A boy becomes the future. Everyone starts treating him like a miniature king before he can even sit up straight. And you? You start to fade again, back into the velvet wallpaper of court life. People still smile at you, they still bow, but their eyes slide past you toward your child. You did your duty, now do it again, and again, until your health fails, your womb gives out, or a younger, fresher wife is found to take your place. And yet you hold your child close in the dark. You whisper lullabies in your mother tongue. You imagine a life where they grow up kinder, freer, better. Maybe they'll change things. Maybe they'll remember you not just as a queen or a duchess, but as someone who survived this strange, brutal life and still found the strength to love them. Once the excitement of your child's birth fades, you settle into your new identity not just as a royal wife, but as a player in the long and shadowy game of court life. The nursery quiets, but the halls never do. Every corridor echoes with whispers, alliances, betrayals, and the delicate music of well-practiced flattery. Welcome to your true test, survival in the silk-lined jungle of royal politics. Your days are spent at court, and they feel endless. You move from room to room like a candle in the wind, smiling at people who secretly hate you and making polite conversation with those who'd poison your breakfast if it advanced their family's interests. Your gowns are flawless, your posture perfect, but your eyes dart constantly reading faces, measuring words, gauging which noblewoman's compliment is laced with venom. Historians still argue whether court politics empowered or entrapped royal women. In reality, it was both. You might be allowed influence, but only so long as it didn't threaten your husband or his advisors. You could suggest, persuade, flatter, but command? Never. And should you speak too often or too boldly, the same courtiers who once praised your cleverness would mutter that you were overstepping. You start to notice patterns. The way one lady always walks with her hand just a little too close to your husband's arm. The way another conveniently forgets you're seating at formal banquets. The gossip threads twist around you like vines. You can't fight them head on. You have to prune them with charm, redirection, and when needed, carefully calculated humiliation, but never openly. You're expected to battle in silence. A mainstream case? Eleanor of Provence, Queen to Henry III of England, was widely criticised for favouring her foreign relatives at court. Though intelligent and politically savvy, her influence was resented, and riots once broke out because of it. Eleanor had power, but power with a price tag, measured in public hatred and personal isolation. You learn to weaponize fashion. Wearing the wrong colour to court can start rumours. Wearing the right one can squash them. That sapphire ring you choose today? It sends a message. That ribbon on your wrist? It recalls the favour you did for a duchess's cousin's wife. Nothing is accidental. Even your laughter is strategic. And then there are the feasts. Grand tables dripping with roast meats, sugar sculptures, and wine by the barrel but you barely eat. Every bite is judged. Too much, and you're indulgent. Too little, and you're either pregnant or plotting something. One noblewoman fakes a cough to avoid the goose and is suddenly whispered about for days. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some courts trained parrots or magpies to mimic gossip overheard in the halls, then released them during garden strolls to see what accidental secrets might be dropped. More than one scandal started with a bird squawking something about Lady So and So's late-night visitor. You keep your windows shut now. Always. Behind closed doors, you try to remain grounded. You write letters, mostly polite lies, with sprinkles of truth. You commission tapestries that tell half-sanitized versions of your life. You teach your child how to bow, how to smile, how to stay silent. You become both mentor and mask. When rival houses gain influence, you feel it in the air thicker, tenser, colder. Suddenly, the ladies who once asked for your embroidery patterns avoid your eyes. Your place at feasts shifts by inches. Your name appears lower on the guest list. You're being tested. Again. Outmaneuvered? Maybe. But not defeated. You've learned some tricks. A misplaced word dropped in the ear of the right clerk can delay a rival's promotion. A conveniently timed charity donation to a local monastery paints you as holy while someone else's sins dominate the gossip. You don't need swords. You have social daggers. They're sharper. Anyway. Still, the stress eats at you. Your health suffers. You miss meals. You lose sleep. You look in the mirror and wonder when exactly your reflection stopped resembling the girl who once played with toy looms and porcelain dolls. You've aged in silence, under candlelight, with a smile always ready even when your heart feels like paper left in the rain. And through it all, your husband changes too. Maybe he grows distant. Maybe he becomes cruel. Maybe he dies younger, not soon enough. But either way, your position can shift in a heartbeat. His favor is your shield, and without it, you are exposed. You become skilled at pretending. Even your sadness must be tasteful. Tears wiped away with monogrammed linens. Grief expressed through music choices and seasonal wardrobe tones. One wrong move, and you're seen as unstable. One too many right moves, and you're called manipulative. You dream of simpler things: fresh bread, bare feet, anonymity. But you don't get to want those things. You get the crown, the gowns, the applause from people who hope you'll slip. And so you smile, again, and walk a little taller down the corridor lined with portraits of women who learned the same hard lessons. You wonder how many of them survived court life, not by being brilliant or brave, but by learning exactly when to be invisible. Your life changes again the moment your husband dies. No matter how powerful you once were, how beloved or feared or needed, widowhood in the medieval royal court is its own kind of exile. You don't cry publicly. That would be tasteless. But you don't smile either. That would be dangerous. You exist now in a strange purgatory, caught between being the mother of an heir and the ghost of a queen. The funeral is a grand affair, of course. Monks chant, bells toll, nobles sob more for appearances than grief. Drapes are black, silver crosses hang heavy, and incense chokes the air until you feel more suffocated by the ritual than the loss. You sit through it all with hands folded, a veil covering your face like a curtain drawn across a stage. Everyone watches to see how you will mourn. Cry too much, and they say you're hysterical. Too little, and you're a cold-hearted opportunist already plotting your next marriage. No one considers the possibility that your grief is quiet, private, hidden behind years of conditioning not to show emotion. Historians still argue whether royal widows held true power or were merely figureheads kept around out of courtesy. The answer depends on politics. If you bore sons and they're still young, you might serve as regent, a puppet queen with strings pulled by barons and bishops. But if your children are grown, or if you failed to produce an heir, your usefulness is limited. Some widows gain brief power in the vacuum. Most simply vanish behind walls and protocol. You're offered a choice, though not really. Remarry to strengthen a new alliance, or retire to a religious life, a devotion to God that everyone pretends wasn't coerced. But deep down you know the truth. It isn't about faith, it's about control. You're politically inconvenient now, and inconvenient women don't stay long in the center of things. Here's a bizarre little historical tidbit: some royal widows were assigned symbolic titles like Queen Dowager or Mother of the Realm, yet given budgets so pitiful they had to borrow gowns for state appearances. One former empress of Byzantium ended up selling her own jewelry to keep her household running. The courts praised her modesty while quietly pocketing the jewels her husband left behind. You pack your things again, not because you want to, but because your chambers are being reassigned. Rooms you once presided over like a sovereign are now inspected by servants preparing them for your successor. Another girl will sleep in your bed. Another voice will echo in your favorite gallery. You keep your head high as you leave, even when your footsteps sound hollow on the stones. Your new home is smaller, colder, quieter. Sometimes it's a castle in the countryside, other times a refurbished nunnery with a few polite furnishings and less polite guards. You're no longer guarded for your safety. You're guarded so you don't influence things you're not supposed to. Your letters are opened before they reach you. Your guests are screened. Your staff report on you in whispers. You've become a liability wrapped in velvet. And still, the days pass. You rise, pray, stitch. You walk the garden paths with aching knees. You read old letters from your youth, back when you believed your future might be yours to shape. You hold on to your identity in fragments through books, through quiet defiance, through the way you arrange the flowers each morning. You speak less. You think more. You wonder what your legacy will be, if any. A mainstream example, Blanche of Lancaster, widow of John of Gaunt, was fortunate enough to be mourned deeply by her husband. He even commissioned Chaucer to write a poem in her honour. But most royal widows were not so lucky. They faded from the public eye, their names footnotes in chronicles obsessed with kings and battles. And yet, being forgotten has its own strange freedom. With no more balls to attend, no more alliances to forge, no more heirs to produce, you finally begin to live quietly, yes, but more truly. You watch birds instead of courtiers. You speak plainly to servants who treat you like a person, not a prize. You begin to write in the margins of old books, not for anyone else, but just to hear your own voice on the page again. You hear whispers about court, about your son coming of age, about your daughter's betrothal, about a new queen with bright eyes and ambitious hands. You feel a twinge, not of jealousy, but of resignation. It's her time now. You had your part. You played it to the letter, even when the script broke your heart. Here's a fringe curiosity. Some widowed queens were occasionally summoned back to court for specific ceremonies, dressed in formal mourning attire, even decades after their husbands' deaths, paraded like relics of a past era to lend a sense of continuity. You might be one of them, called back to stand in a shadowed alcove at a coronation, to offer a silent blessing no one asked for but everyone expected. You bow, you smile, and then you disappear again. In the end, you become a story told in low voices. She was once queen, they say. She was beautiful, they say. Clever. Some will add kindness, others cruelty, depending on how your presence affected their family's fortunes. The truth lies somewhere in between, tangled in memories and missing pages. You tend to a small chapel nearby, lighting candles not for saints, but for sisters, other royal women who came before you and after. You imagine them as you light each flame: the girl sent away at 13, the mother who died in childbirth, the queen who wore armor to defend her regency, the duchess accused of sorcery because she read too many books. You nod to each as the wax melts and the air fills with the scent of burning devotion. And in your final years, when your hands shake and your eyesight dims, a young noblewoman might visit. She'll curtsy, she'll call you, Your Grace, and you'll see in her the same tight smile, the same trained elegance, the same fear just beneath the surface. You'll pour her tea and ask about her family. You'll warn her, gently, without saying too much, and when she leaves, you'll pray she fares better than you did, because you survived a royal life. That alone makes you extraordinary. It starts with a letter, or a summons, or perhaps simply silence. One morning, the guard at your gate informs you that your allowance has been reduced, that your household staff will be reassigned, or that your correspondence now requires approval from a steward you've never met. No explanation, no debate, just a shift in the ira, quiet tightening of the leash, because you, royal widow, have outlived your usefulness, and the court has moved on. They call it retirement, a spiritual retreat, a peaceful chapter, a return to God. But you know what it really is: banishment with a velvet cushion. You're being sent away, not for any crime you committed, but because your presence at court is a political inconvenience. Your very existence is a reminder of past regimes, old tensions, fragile alliances long buried. You are history that still breathes, and no one wants the past wandering the halls. So, they lock you in a nunnery. Not literally, not at first. You aren't chained or publicly disgraced. You're escorted with ceremony, given a private carriage, greeted at the gates by smiling abbesses with hands folded in scripted piety. But it's a prison all the same. The walls may be high and whitewashed, the floors swept, the gardens orderly, but you know the truth. This is not sanctuary, it's political storage. Historians still argue whether these placements were cruel or pragmatic, meant to protect widows or simply to silence them. But for you, it doesn't matter. You wake each day to the sound of bells, not invitations. You eat in silence. You sleep in a room so small you can stretch your arms and touch both walls. And for the first time in your life, no one is watching. You are invisible. There's a strange pain in that invisibility. You were raised to be seen, weighed, admired. Your clothes were once stitched with gold thread. Now you wear wool. Simple, scratchy, dull. Your jewels are gone. Your titles are forgotten. You're addressed as sister or lady dowager, depending on how pious the speaker feels. Your mirrors are gone too. The nuns say it's to reduce vanity. You suspect it's to help you forget your face. And yet, in the quiet, you begin to feel something new. Not joy, not peace, but clarity. You start to hear your own thoughts, unshaped by court expectations. You begin to remember your own voice, no longer masked by courtly rehearsals. You think of your childhood, your journey, your losses not as items on a ledger, but as pieces of yourself you'd long hidden behind obedience and titles. There's a well in the courtyard, old stone, cold water. You sit by it most days, not to draw water but to think. Sometimes a bird lands nearby, tilts its head, flies away. You envy its wings. Other days, novice nuns come to tend the flowers, and you watch their hands, young hands, uncalloused, still full of hope. You do not interrupt them. You do not speak. You simply exist, a relic among roses. You try to find solace in routine, morning prayers, afternoon psalms, a meal of broth and stale bread. No more banquets, no more roast peacocks or sugared almonds, but also no more poisoned cups or barbed compliments. No more corsets pulled too tight. No more pretending not to notice your husband's wandering eyes. There is pain in the simplicity, but also freedom. You sleep now without fear, and yet, the world does not forget you completely. Sometimes a visitor arrives, a former maid now married to a baker, a bishop who remembers your coronation, a nobleman who served your son, and now carries a message on his behalf. They speak to you as if you are part of another world. I remember your gowns. You were gracious at court. Your son speaks highly of you. They stay only briefly. You thank them. You close the door after them and sit down again by the fireless hearth. A mainstream example? Elizabeth Woodville, Queen Consort to Edward IV of England, was sent to Bermondsey Abbey after her husband's death and her fall from political favour. She lived out her days in relative obscurity, a former queen reduced to a life of prayer and detachment. Her story is not unique. You are simply one more link in a chain of forgotten royal women, locked away under the guise of devotion. Sometimes you hear rumours through the walls. A new war, a new treaty, your grandson's wedding, your great-granddaughter born with your eyes. You close your own eyes and try to picture them. You wonder what traits you passed on. Strength, fear, survival. Here's a fringe curiosity. Some royal women took to writing during their years in seclusion. Not grand memoirs, but simple reflections, hidden prayers, coded poems, stitched into linens, or scratched into wax tablets. These fragments, when found, reveal sharp wit, bitter honesty, and deep sorrow. You begin writing too, in secret, not for the world, not even for your children, just for yourself. Because even now, even here, your mind still spins. Seasons change. You count them by the way the sunlight hits the chapel window. Spring brings violets, summer brings bees, autumn strips the garden bare, winter presses its cold lips to your window pane. The other women age around you. Some younger nuns replace older ones. The abbess dies. Another takes her place. You remain, steady, unmoving, uninvited, but still breathing. And then one morning, the courier arrives. A letter sealed in crimson wax. Your son is king now. He invites you to court. Not as a figurehead, not as an exile, but as the Queen Mother. You stare at the letter for a long time, hands trembling. You haven't worn satin in 20 years. You haven't ridden a horse, heard applause, or sat in a throne. The idea terrifies you. But something inside stirs. A whisper, not of ambition but of curiosity. You have survived the nursery, the altar, the bedroom, the court, the birthing bed, the funeral, and the cloister. Could you survive one last return? You don't decide right away. Instead, you walk to the courtyard, sit by the old well, and watch the light play across the water's surface. You lower a pebble in and wait for the ripples to fade. Then you smile, not because of the invitation, but because for the first time in years, the decision is entirely yours. You don't return to court immediately. The letter remains tucked in the folds of your prayer book, read and reread, until the wax seal softens from handling and your fingertips remember every ridge of the crest pressed into it. You weigh the offer like a stone in your lap. Return to the court where the velvet smiles are edged with iron, or remain in quiet exile, surrounded by silence and crickets and crumbling saints. Eventually, you choose the former, not out of longing for glory or a rekindled taste for power, but because the court is your only real home. You were never meant for gardens and solitude. You were forged in throne rooms and council chambers. And so, you accept, with dignity, with care, with the careful tone of someone who has survived too much to be naive again. The journey back is not the triumph it might have been decades ago. You ride in a carriage, older now, layered in wool and memories. Towns pass by like whispers. Villagers bow or blink in confusion. Some don't recognize you. Some only know your name from old tapestries. But the world has changed. You have become legend not in the shining, heroic sense, but as a half-remembered footnote. When you reach the capital, the castle seems smaller than you recall. The walls are less imposing, the halls less endless. Either it has shrunk, or you've simply grown inwardly, in a way that makes it all feel manageable. Your son meets you. His face is tired, but kind. His words are carefully chosen. He kisses your hand. You smile at him, and for a moment, you forget all the battles external and internal and just feel the pulse of motherhood again. You survived. He is alive. That is enough. They prepare rooms for you. Not your old ones, those belong to the new queen, of course, but they're elegant and quiet, with windows facing east and tapestries you recognize from a lifetime ago. You touch the fabrics, feel the dust woven into the gold threads, and wonder how many hands passed through these halls after you left. It is strange to be treated like an honored guest in what was once your dominion, like a ghost who's been invited back only for a brief haunting. Historians still argue whether late life returns to court were symbolic gestures or genuine restorations of influence. For you, the truth is something between. You do not hold the reins anymore, but you know where they are kept. You are watched, yes, but also consulted. Your words matter, even if only whispered behind doors. The courtiers are cautious around you, unsure whether to flatter, to fear, or to pity. And then comes the strangest moment of all, meeting the new queen, your daughter-in-law. She is young, radiant, polite to a fault. Her curtsy is flawless. Her eyes don't meet yours too long. You can sense her discomfort, not out of disrespect, but out of awareness. She knows you held her place once. She knows her current splendor rests on the same foundations that nearly swallowed you whole. And you? You look at her and see a version of yourself from another life, and you want to warn her, but you don't. Instead, you sit together. You talk of seasonal fruit, of court music, of embroidery patterns and prayer beads. The language of Queen's delicate, evasive, layered with meaning. You smile when she says she's nervous about bearing children. You nod when she asks for advice, but you do not offer the whole truth. Some lessons must be learned in the dark. A mainstream example? Catherine de' Medici returned to the center of French power after years in the background, becoming one of the most influential figures in European politics during her son's reign. Her reputation is mixed. Some see her as a ruthless schemer, others as a pragmatic survivor. You see in her a mirror, a woman who adapted, endured, and outlasted the world that tried to shrink her. You take on small roles again, hosting feasts, overseeing minor ceremonies, writing letters of introduction for young noblewomen. You are the royal mother, now the crown's soft echo, its graceful shadow. And with this title comes strange power. People visit you not out of fear or duty, but out of curiosity and reverence. You are the living memory of a previous age. You are wisdom in silk slippers. And yet, you remain careful. You do not overreach. You do not counsel on wars or succession. You've learned. Influence that appears harmless is the most lasting kind. You smile and drop your hints through parables. You ask questions that plant seeds rather than demand answers. You become a gardener of politics, tending things gently, slowly, always from the edge. A quirky tidbit? In some courts, it was custom for elder queens to oversee the royal library, curating what books could be read by young princesses. A soft form of censorship, yes, but also a powerful shaping tool. You take up this role gladly. You insert one or two older text zones that speak of courage in lace and resistance through etiquette. Perhaps the next generation will read between the lines. As weeks turn into months, you find a rhythm. You wake, drink rosewater tea, write a few notes, stroll the terrace gardens, and receive visitors who bring you little cakes and big stories. You nod through their flattery, smile through their ambitions, and send them off with carefully chosen words that make them think they've won something. They haven't, but you're generous. Let them feel clever. At night, you lie in bed and listen to the distant murmurs of the court, a string quartet in the dining hall, a door clicking shut far down the corridor, wind brushing against stained glass. You think of all the things you've seen, all the things you've survived. Betrothals at 6, wedding nights in candlelight, childbirth, betrayal, banishment, return, and now, twilight. And still, there's more to do. You begin writing again, not the hidden jottings of exile, but a formal record, a private chronicle of your life, addressed not to a historian, but to someone like you, a girl born into power without agency. You write in gentle tones, never bitter, always honest. You leave space in the margins for questions. You hope someone will find it one day not to study you, but to understand. Because even now, as an aging queen mother tucked into the backdrop of a new reign, you know that stories have power, and royal women, long after they are buried, can still whisper through stone and ink. You may not be remembered for battles or banners, but perhaps your survival will speak. Perhaps your silence will echo. Perhaps your life, brutal and beautiful, will remind someone one day that she is not alone. Time moves differently now. The hours no longer gallop like they did when you were young and bracing for your wedding, nor do they crawl like the days locked away behind nunnery walls. Now they drift slow, soft, full of little nothings that make up the end of a life once drenched in meaning. You're still at court, still wrapped in damask and draped in pearls, but you feel the shift in how they speak to you, less with reverence, more with warmth. Less, your grace, more, the old queen. A relic, yes, but one they still dust and display. Your name echoes in the marble halls less often, no longer spoken with caution, as it once was during your youth when you were either a rising bride or a widow with dangerous influence, but with affection, amusement, the way one might talk about a childhood portrait. You are admired but at a safe distance from relevance. Not hated, not feared, not needed, just remembered. This is the final chapter for many royal women. Not a fall from grace, but a slow, almost imperceptible slide into ceremonial invisibility. You appear for festivals, stand during processions, receive foreign dignitaries who call you madam, and pretend they haven't already read your obituary draft. You speak only when spoken to. You wear the colours of the season. You smile when your hands ache from age and your teeth no longer like the sweetmeats. And still, you hold on to your dignity, not because anyone demands it, but because it's yours, earned, sharpened through years of performance and pain. You glide rather than walk. You speak slowly and precisely. Your every word now carries the weight of decades. Younger women lean in when you talk, not because you're loud, but because your voice carries history. They think your stories are charming. They don't realize they're warnings. A mainstream historical example? Queen Adelaide of Saxe-Meiningen, widow of William IV of Britain, remained in the background of Victorian Englander, gracious presence during the rise of Queen Victoria, her niece. She didn't interfere, didn't command, but she stayed, watched, whispered where needed. You understand that posture well. The power of being seen but not threatening. The delicate balance of visibility without disruption. There's a particular moment that arrives for every royal woman. The first time someone younger repeats a story from your life, but gets the details wrong. You sit at the edge of the room, hands folded, and hear them describe your wedding gown as blue, though it was gold. They say you cried at your coronation, though you remember blinking furiously to keep from doing so. They say your husband loved you deeply, though you remember nights of cold silence between two pillows. You do not correct them. You simply listen. And in that moment you realize that your life has begun to slip from your grasp. Not your control, no. That went years ago, but your ownership of it. Now, others tell your story, and you are left to nod, politely, as they misunderstand you. This is where the ghosts start to gather. Not the kind that rattle chains or haunt crypts, but the kind that live in memories. You see your mother, briefly, in the way your granddaughter turns her head. You see your first child in the way the new prince stumbles during ceremonies. You see yourself, again and again, but never directly. Always reflected, always refracted through someone else's life. You spend more time in the chapel, not necessarily out of deepening faith, but because it's quiet, and the air always smells like beeswax and breathless prayer. You light candles not just for the dead, but for the forgotten, for the girls whose names were lost in the folds of royal bedding, for the wives who were buried in silence, for the sisters who never made it to court. You whisper their names under your breath. No one hears. But that's fine. You remember. And here's a fascinating fringe tidbit. Many royal tombs were built with secret compartments behind them, not for treasure, but for second coffins. Mistresses, bastard children, even loyal servants. A shadow lineage tucked behind alabaster queens and marble kings. You once found this scandalous. Now, you find it oddly comforting. Even in death, royal women were not alone. Even in stone, there was company. But while you're still alive, your role continues. Your wrinkles deepen, your knees crack like dry parchment. Your breath comes in slower bursts, but you keep attending banquets. You sit in the corner near the musicians. You smile at every toast. You nod at ambassadors and quietly correct their titles when they forget themselves. Your presence alone is a stabilizer, a thread tying the past to the present. You start passing on little treasures. A ring here, a comb there, a book of poetry with your faded notes in the margins. Not all to family, some to staff. Some to girls who remind you of who you were hungry for, approval but clever enough to pretend otherwise. You don't explain the gifts. You simply say, "You'll understand when you're older." And most of them do. Eventually, one of your knees swells too much to dance. Then, you skip the next feast. Then, the morning walk becomes a seated visit to the courtyard. Your world begins to shrink again, not into the bitter confines of exile, but into a manageable cocoon. Fewer visitors, shorter letters, more silence. The court continues without you, just as it always has. You are still dressed each morning, still powdered, still braided. But you notice the maids take longer now, more gently. They move around you like they would an altar. Not fragile, exactly, but sacred. They touch you like a living relic. One brushes your hair and whispers that her grandmother remembered your coronation. You almost laugh. You remember when you didn't even know what a coronation was. Historians still argue whether the final years of royal women were truly peaceful or simply numb. But you know the truth. They are a mix. There is peace in not having to perform. But there is also grief in being done. You no longer have to smile for diplomats or birth heirs. But you also no longer get to shape the world. You watch now. That's all. And yet, you still matter. Not because of titles. Not because of jewels. But because you survived. You lived the full arc: birth, betrothal, marriage, motherhood, widowhood, exile, return, and finally quiet. You endured the brutal life royal women were born into, and now you sit in the last golden sliver of the candle's glow. One evening, you sit by the fire with a girl of 15, some cousin or minor princess, bright-eyed and bored with embroidery. She asks if you were ever in love. You pause, not because you don't have an answer, but because you have too many. You smile and say, "Once I loved dancing in the snow," and she laughs like it's a riddle. You don't clarify. That moment is yours. Your world has gone quiet, yet still it breathes. You no longer sit in court. You do not rise for morning briefings, nor attend strategy meetings wrapped in velvet and caution. You've stepped out of the center ring, and now dwell in the margins, yet those margins are embroidered with gold thread and soft light. The halls that once rang with your footsteps now echo with those of your great-grandchildren, shrill laughter bouncing off stained glass, their feet clumsy on the same cold stone you once mastered in satin slippers. Each day is measured in smaller ways now. The opening of shutters, the weight of blankets, the way the sky darkens earlier each evening. You are old, undeniably, not delicately aged like the court would have once described you, but truly, deeply old. Your bones complain, your breath shortens. You require help with laces and stairs, but your mind remains alert, sharp as a jeweled dagger in a dusted drawer. You have become ceremonial, wheeled out for festivals, positioned by fireplaces during winter banquets, kissed on the cheek by children who only understand that you're someone important from a long time ago. And you accept it, not with resentment, not with sadness, but with a calm sense of reality. Time has no bias. Even queens are outlived by the world. The new Quintha one, you once watched nervously for signs of failure, now ages herself. You see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the way she exhales before entering a feast, the fatigue behind her smiles. You exchange glances sometimes, and there's understanding in that look. She is where you once stood, and you have become what she fears becoming, obsolete, powerless, enduring. There's a strange kind of freedom in it. No one asks you for anything anymore. No one expects grand alliances or speeches or heirs. You are no longer a means to an end. You exist only because you've endured. And yet, ironically, in your invisibility, you gain a sort of truth. You see clearly now politics stripped of glamour, titles hollowed of meaning. You understand who cared for you and who simply needed you. The balance is not in your favor, but it is enough. You remember a time when you couldn't move without being observed, when even a misstep on a staircase could start rumors of pregnancy, madness, or rebellion. Now, you sit in a sunlit alcove and doze with your embroidery in your lap, and the court walks by without noticing. You are a stone bench carved with ivy. You are always there, and thus easily overlooked. And yet, despite everything, stories still sprout around you. They say you once rode a horse through a blizzard to deliver news of a birth. They say you poisoned a rival duchess with rosewater tea. They say you wore men's armor beneath your gown. All false, all true. The truth was never the point. You are no longer a person to most but a legend dressed in silk. A mainstream historical fact. Queen Melisende of Jerusalem ruled alongside her husband, then alone after his death, managing the Crusader state with a steady hand and sharp political instinct. But even she, a woman of power and intelligence, was eventually pushed aside by her son once he came of age. She died quietly, revered, forgotten. You think of her often. She understood what it meant to be necessary, until you weren't. And for something less known-some, royal women, long after their deaths, were literally moved from one tomb to another as dynasties shifted and new kings sought to rewrite lineage. Bones uprooted, queens disinterred for optics. Your skin prickles at the thought. Even in death, no peace is guaranteed. You begin to prepare, quietly, methodically. You speak to the clerk about your last wishes. You request a modest tomb, smaller than expected, with no gilding. You ask that it be near the chapel, not the great hall. You do not need a crowd to remember you, just a place to rest, somewhere simple, somewhere silent. You revise your letters. You edit the journal you started long ago. You remove the pettiness, the rage, the despair. You keep the facts, the names, the betrayals, the decisions that shaped kingdoms. But you soften the edges, not to lie, but to give peace. You are no longer writing to be understood. You are writing to be forgiven. Your final days pass gently. The attendants whisper more. They sing under their breath. They bring you tea without being asked. You hear the birds before you open your eyes, and the sun comes through the window in long golden streaks. You keep the same chair by the fire, the same blanket. You doze more often, but your dreams are lighter, now less haunted, more woven with laughter and flickering candlelight. One morning, you simply do not rise. The maid calls your name once, then again. She finds you there, curled in sleep that isn't sleep, your hands folded, your breath stilled. The court reacts as expected. Bells toll, banners are lowered, portraits are draped in black, but most carry on. A girl you once mentored weeps openly. Your son, now grey and bent, spends a long time alone in the chapel. The queen visits your chambers and takes one of your shawls quietly, folding it into her arms like a book. Servants say they still feel your presence in the halls, that the scent of your lavender oil lingers even after the fires are put out. The scholars write their summaries. She was a queen consort, a dowager, a mother, a political figure in her day. They compress you into paragraphs. They debate your influence. They forget your real name and remember only your titles. But a child in the nursery once asked who you were, and when told, she said, "Oh, the woman who always gave me ginger sweets." And that, in the end, is the most honest truth. You lived, not just as a pawn or a queen, but as a woman. You loved, you wept, you endured, and when the world finally let you go, it did so gently because you had already let go of it. And now, as the candle burns low and the shadows stretch long across the stone floor, you settle into stillness. The noise of court has faded, the clang of swords and the rustle of silks now distant echoes. No more waiting, no more proving, no more enduring. The rhythm of your breath slows, and the world outside your chamber grows quiet with respect. There is comfort in the silence, in the hush that follows a life fully lived. The cold stone walls no longer seem so harsh. They cradle you now, holding all the laughter, sorrow, and strength you poured into them. Your story doesn't end with fanfare or fury. It ends the way all true stories do, gently, with grace, in the quiet turning of seasons. Outside, the ivy still climbs. The bells toll softly in the chapel. Somewhere down the corridor, a child laughs, and a nursemaid hushes her, not knowing that joy is what you would have wanted to leave behind. The halls breathe without you, but they carry your imprint in every creaking floorboard and candlelit corridor. You can rest now, No more gowns, no more games, just warmth, darkness, and the peace of knowing you survived what so many could not. Your name may fade, but your strength lingers in daughters who question, in queens who lead, in women who will never again be only symbols. So let your eyes close, let your breath soften, and drift into that velvet dark sleep. You've earned your silence, you've earned your story. Now, hush. The fire's low, the wind is still, and sleep is waiting with open arms. Good night, sweet dreams.